Welcome to the Happy Half Hour. We'll be getting started in just a minute. While we are waiting for everybody to join, just a note that this webinar will be recorded and sent to participants. You can also find previous recordings of our webinars on our website, brooksgroup.com. All right, we will get started. Welcome everyone to the virtual Happy Half Hour for Friday, November 13th. Today's topic is how to be a great remote coach. And this is our 21st episode. And so what better way to celebrate turning 21 than with a happy hour, or at least a happy half hour. So, this is probably a series that has extended longer than we expected simply because COVID has extended much longer than we expected. So be sure to celebrate our 21st birthday after the episode. I am Michelle Richardson, the Vice President of Sales Performance Research here at the Brooks Group, coming to you from North Carolina, and I'm joined again from California, as we are coast to coast, by Russ Scherer, our Director of Sales Strategy Effectiveness. Welcome, Russ.
Thanks, Michelle. Great to be back with everyone today. And great to be tackling this topic because becoming a remote coach is even more critical now that we are all remote. Some of us who've managed sales teams have had people distributed across the US, but still get the chance to see them every once in a while on ride-alongs or something. But we're going to really take a look at it today from how do we do with it full time. And our sponsor today is Virtual Selling Essentials. These are a part of a micro module series that we at the Brooks Group have developed to talk about sort of essential skills for sales people and sales leaders. They include things like how to set up your office for virtual selling, how to develop new prospects in a virtual world, how to make sure you're not letting the remoteness of the remote aspect of the communication get in the way of asking better questions, maybe even including as a module on how to close business when you're not face-to-face. So these are a series of 8, 10, 12-minute videos. You can buy them one at a time or get them in groups. We'll have more on it later in the webinar. But for now, Michelle, we've got kind of a 3-point or 4-point, I guess. We're going to talk a little bit about the case for coaching, talk about why it's so hard, and then how do we do it organizationally and how do we do it one-on-one and make it effective. So Michelle, you've been, as usual, looking at data. What's the case for coaching?
Well, thank you, Russ. And yes, we know, I think all of us can acknowledge and know that coaching is very important. But why is it really important now? What makes it even more critical? What is really that case for coaching right now? So I saw this data point that's on the screen here in a McKinsey article last week, and I will say that it really stuck with me. And that is that the top 30% of reps outperform the bottom 30% by as much as 4x. So they are 4 times more productive, outperform their bottom performer counterparts. And this is based on total sales, and it does exclude reps of less than 1 year tenure. And I think this has really some significant ramifications for organizations right now. So we know from our own research survey results that only 36% of organizations expect to end this year at or above target. So if you could close that performance gap between your stronger and weaker performers, that's certainly one way that you can drive some much needed additional revenue. And I think for organizations that have had extraordinary years this year, those that have really benefited from the current environment, they're going to need to figure out how to pull more performance as well as their circumstances change, perhaps as the new year comes. So, obviously one reason that coaching is so important now is the performance gap. But there's also another piece at play, and that's really the change management aspect. So the times, they are still changing. It's no doubt that 2020 has been a year of significant change. Sales Management Association released some research last month in October around change management and having to pivot sales strategy. And they indicated, no shock here, that 52% of sales organizations have experienced a high degree of change since COVID. And we know, for instance, from our research and from talking to customers, that sales process has been heavily impacted. So making that change from face-to-face selling to virtual selling, for instance. There's been other changes, having to shift role accountabilities, moving from more of an outside sales rep to an inside-outside hybrid, changing KPIs. It's just been one change after another this year. And so I think that's really another important aspect relative to coaching. In this same survey, though, 36% of organizations say that their sales management has effectively prepared their sales team to adapt and change. So there's a gap there in terms of our sales team's readiness to be agile in the current situation. And 56% of sales organizations say they still expect significant to extensive change in the next 6 months. So it's not over, folks. So we're looking at performance gaps. We're looking at change management as two critical reasons that coaching is so important right now. So how do we close these gaps? How do we make our teams higher performing, and how do we build agile sales ready sales teams? Effective coaching, obviously, is why we're here today. Ring DNA indicated, this was back in 2018, that less than 22% of sales managers have implemented a formal coaching program for their teams. So clearly there's an opportunity here to up our game on coaching. In my experience, there can be a little bit of a blind spot here with managers relative to what constitutes a formal coaching program, or even what is effective coaching. Often before making our own recommendations on a training program here at the Brooks Group, we'll do an organizational assessment to really understand where the gaps are. And in one aspect, we will ask members of the sales organization to rate their manager's frequency of coaching and the quality of coaching. And it's very common. In fact, I just saw this recently with a client, that sales leaders will score themselves very high in these areas. Yes, I do ride-alongs on a regular basis. Yes, I have quality coaching time with my direct reports. Yes, we have frequent team meetings, and there's a training component to them. And they'll rate themselves very high. And the sales teams themselves, their direct reports, will say, yeah, not so much. There will be a couple of point difference in their perspective. So clearly there's a gap in what sales managers may perceive as effective formal coaching and what their teams are receiving. So effective coaching, here's an area that we really do need to focus on in order to help close those gaps and manage the change that's coming. The other component, which is becoming more and more common, is data analytics. So this same McKinsey study that indicated the top performers outperform their bottom performers by 4x, indicated that companies that use sales behavior insights improve productivity by 20%. So we at the Brooks Group are huge advocates for joint calls, for windshield time, for managers spending that quality time with sales reps, going out, traveling with them, making calls, and really evaluating their performance. But we know that that's harder to do right now because you can't get out. So there are tools that can really help provide that data and the insights to really help you figure out what works for your top performers and how to replicate it, and determine where your coaching gaps are. There are tools like Gong and Chorus that will record sales calls and provide you analytics. Your CRM can be a source of that information as well. In this same study, in fact, that McKinsey found that high-performing reps spend 22% more time with customers, and that top performers made 82% more prospecting calls, phone calls, and sent 26% fewer emails. So if you can take this data, really understand what makes your top performers, use that to really guide and inform your developmental coaching of the rest of your team. So together, those coaching skills and the data and insights can put you on the road to success.
And Michelle, if I could just add something here, data analytics sounds like a big phrase, and we think of AI engines and all sorts of different metrics and things, but it really just means looking at the data that you have. So if all you've got are weekly call reports that your team send to you every week, even that gives you data in terms of who's making calls, what do the number of prospects look like. So while there is a lot of sophistication we can do, and we use Gong.io at the Brooks Group, we think it's a really great tool. If your particular tech appetite isn't quite that high, there's still numbers that you can work through to be able to get that data.
And that's a great point. I think the best advice is start somewhere, to take what you have available to you and start there. And then as you continue down that journey, maybe you do incorporate technology, maybe you don't, but the data is there if you look for it, and it does not have to be anything overly technical or complex to be effective. And so a word from our sponsor. Russ mentioned that today we are sponsored by Virtual Selling Essentials, our micro-learning series. The same McKinsey report that I was referencing indicated that 70 to 80% of B2B buyers prefer remote interactions with sellers right now. So if your organization is one that has experienced significant shifts in this way, if your coaching and your data insights indicate that perhaps your team has some gaps in the virtual selling area, this could be a valuable tool to coach your team. Virtual Selling Essentials is a self-paced micro-learning series. It's packed with what your team needs right now in this current environment to stay engaged and be productive. They're hyper-focused, they're skill-specific, prospecting virtually, positioning virtually, pre-call planning, effective questioning strategies. Russ mentioned closing strategies as well, all geared toward the virtual environment. These are 8 to 10 minute videos. There's a handout that goes along with it. So for more information, email contact@thebrooksgroup.com, and producer Rich is going to put that in the chat box. So Russ, why is coaching so hard?
Oh, good question. And I think all of us know coaching is valuable. Maybe it's like flossing, right? Every time we go to the dentist, we're told to floss more. And yet for some reason, we tend to never quite floss as much as they want. At the Brooks Group, we've been around for over 40 years. And our founder, Bill Brooks, began a series of things he called sales truths. And one of the sales truths he came up with is that coaching is the single most important job of a sales manager. If your team is going to be successful, if you are going to be successful long-term, it's because your team knows how to perform well, they have the right degree of autonomy, and they make good decisions. And I'll never forget, I came to this one time. I was on a sales call in Minnesota with one of our reps who was very good, very strong producer, in fact. And I watched him give a presentation. And like a lot of sales managers, I stepped in at the time and sort of took over the presentation for him because he was floundering. And as soon as we got back to the car, it dawned on me that, yeah, I could save one presentation one day on the one day a quarter I was in Minnesota. But all of the rest of the time, those other 89 days or whatever the working days were, he was the one doing the presentations. And so if I really wanted success beyond just feeling good about myself in one account, I needed to be able to start doing coaching and focusing in on skills. And so let's start with kind of what is coaching? What's the definition? Because I think there's a lot of confusion. Coaching is that ongoing individualized teaching and guidance of sales managers on the part of them to improve sales rep performance. And they tend to fall into three categories. We all know that we do more deal coaching than anything else. How do we win this account? Where are we strong? Where are we weak? What's our strategy? But in addition to that, we also have just operational coaching. What do you need to do to perform in the role that you're in? And then even more important now in COVID is the idea of what about digital coaching? And how do we start to be able to use some of the tools that we've got? Now, in addition to that, I think there's maybe another level of come in that we talk about here at the Brooks Group called the levels of coaching. People, when they think of coaching, think of, what we call parent kind of coaching or remedial coaching where they're not doing the job and therefore they're on the danger of not having a job anymore. And in the organizations I've worked for, we used to call those performance improvement plans. If you got put on a PIP, it meant you needed to get something fixed right away or you were going to be out. But in addition to parenting kind of coaching, there's two other kinds. There's partnering, where they're in their current job and you're just trying to help them to execute operational or digital tools better. And then there's a peer kind of coaching where you're actually helping them come up and mentoring them for that next job. In some cases, even to maybe replace you, should you move up or should you move somewhere else in the organization or move on. And there's a fear in that peer or mentor level coaching because people think, well, if I train my people to be leaders, they're going to want to step up and do that in an organization. And again, research shows that your retention rates actually go up 50% if you are investing in your people because they know you have their best interests at heart. So they're not as quick to jump to another job, but they're focused on learning and growing. One of the reasons I think that some of the reasons why people don't coach, one, they're too busy. We all know our calendars are full and it's hard to squeeze it in. But there's some other subtle reasons. I ask people in my sales management classes, do you believe that you're the best salesperson in your organization? And usually somewhere between 60 and 70% of the sales managers raise their hand and acknowledge, yes, they are the best. And I think some managers would much rather get in and win the deal. They get into the firefight at the last minute and pull it out to be successful. I worked one time with a guy, a peer, who was running a sales group, and his name was Art. And you knew that Art was the last 2 weeks of the quarter going to be deeply engaged with every single account. He saw himself as the closer. But as a result, the rest of his team either both didn't develop, and also they were a little discouraged because they knew that Art was going to try and step in and get some of the, let's call it, glory or credit for closing that particular deal. So you have to look at your motivation. Some sales leaders lack confidence. I was on a client call this week and they have a new leader in a new territory, and the person has done a lot of different things, but never was a salesperson. And so they just don't really know how to coach someone. They lack the confidence to be able to communicate and direct people. And then right now it's hard because we don't have that windshield time, as Michelle has said. We just lack that ability to spend time either driving or over a meal or something else as we go through it. And what frustrates me or concerns me about this is every sales leader I talk to has one or two frustration points with her or his team. And they say, we've got to get better here. We've got to get better here. And yet over time, a lot of them fail to take a step towards improvement there, which means they've either got a problem with coaching or they've got a problem with replacing that individual. And I just want to encourage sales leaders out there that you own this. This is yours. So let's talk a little bit about the organizational practices. We'll talk about one-on-one later on, but number one, you are the owner of this. The team and its improvement belongs to you. It doesn't belong to HR. It doesn't belong to individuals, although they all play roles. If your team is not performing at the level you want them to, it goes right back to the sales manager. And number one, that is really clear standards and communicating those standards. And I think that seems like it's so basic, but I can't tell you how many organizations we work with where a lot of times they'll say, well, the weakness we have is they're not finding enough new business. And I'll say, well, how are you encouraging them to do that? Or how does the comp plan align with new business? Or what's the penalty if they don't get new business? And it's all kind of like, well, I just told them it's important. And so you haven't really set the standards for the organization. One of the things I find because of that sometimes is because sales leaders either get promoted from the ranks or they want to be the friends sometimes of their salespeople. And it's hard when you're a friend to call out and step up weaknesses. We teach in Impact that there's a real difference between being liked and being trusted. And you start first from that level of trust. They have to know that you have their best interests in mind, as well as the organization. And like should flow from that the other way around. We all bring our styles in terms of who we are into this. We're going to talk about that a little bit more. But at the end of the day, coaching is about identifying certain areas where there's a gap between where they are and where they want to be, even if it's aspirational, and then helping to work through that. What coaching isn't is trying to make everybody like you. And I've seen that as well, that they're like, well, I do it this way, so you should do it exactly the same. We bring our styles to selling. The one other thing I'd encourage you on in terms of this ownership and clear standards, every time I have had to take the action of letting somebody go from a sales team, the rest of their peers, or any team for that matter, the rest of their peers all come to me and say, "What took you so long?" Poor performance is recognized by the peers just as fast or faster than you are. So don't feel like, well, the team's going to not support it or anything else, because they're usually the ones that are cheering you on to do it. So what do we do? In those clear standards, what I want to recommend that you do, we teach something called a key accountability matrix. Don't You can start with the job description if you want, but it has far too many things on it. Come up with the top 4 or 5 things you want your team to be doing. Prospecting, getting renewals on existing accounts, doing better presentations, better discovery to understand strengths and weaknesses of your product, whatever it might be, and list those 4 or 5 things. And then assign both a priority, what's most important, second, third, fourth, and give them a clue of what you think from a percentage perspective is the right amount of time they should be spending on that. So if it number one priority, for example, is finding new business, is that 50% of their time or 20% of their time? Give them some guidance there. That'll really help them. Number two, everybody should be participating. You want to coach A, B, and C players. We talked about how we coach those strong players, they tend to stay around. Research shows that the best return on your investment in coaching is on the B players. C players tend to be the least effective. So if you've got somebody who's really having issues, we encourage people to figure out, is this a can they issue, meaning they just don't know and you've got to help them? Or is this a will they? There's something blocking their ability to execute in that area. And if they're just not comfortable picking up the phone to make a call, or they're not comfortable asking for an order, or they want to be doing something else other than the hard work of building relationships, that's a will do issue. And you've got to assess that and just determine whether or not their level of the player is going to be worth it. Especially as I mentioned earlier, right now, you also need to look at their use of digital tools. A lot of the organizations we work with for far too long have allowed people to shy away from whatever the digital tool might be, the use of their computer in presentations, or entering data in CRM, being able to send video emails, whatever it might be. People are like, I'm just not a tech guy. I'm just going to use my phone, and I've got it all written down here in my notebook. That's a problem now, but I think it's the manager's job to help people understand how to use those tools. It's not just hand it off to IT and let them do it. And if you don't know how to use it, you signal to your team that maybe it's not all that important anyway. So you need to kind of, as the leader, take the lead in that. What do we do? I'd say start with groups. Use part of your weekly sales meetings, maybe 10 minutes, to talk about something that your entire group is struggling with, or needs some improvement on. Maybe it's a step in the sales process. Maybe it's presenting a new tool. And I'd encourage you to think about who is good on your team in that area and let them present. This doesn't have to be content you create. This is really about content that they have a skill in, and it gives them a chance to stand in front of their peers and do some education. It begins to set up also this idea of peer-to-peer coaching, where maybe you pair your folks up. Somebody's really good at technology, but they don't have a lot of years experience. Somebody's got a lot of years experience and understands the industry with great depth, and together they can help each other in a great way. One thing I think that every sales rep that I've ever talked to can use help on is this idea around time or priority management. And it doesn't matter whether it's, what are the right activities to do? How do I deal with and find the best leads in my stack? So many people these days are email driven. An email comes in, that's what they react to. The next email, that's what they react to. And there's no triage or sense of time in terms of what they're going to use. So that might be a great place to start to just get some more effectiveness out of your individual reps. And then finally, what happens when we move to one-on-one? One-on-one coaching is where individual improvement takes place. Number one, it's got to be consistent. Put it in your schedule. I was in reading up and studying on this. I found something I really like. It says, book it early in the day, book it early in the week, and book it early in the month. Another one said, do your coaching before noon, because we all know that our days get away from us as sales managers. And the closer it gets to whatever the end of our period is, the harder it's going to be to find that time. So get it on the calendar and make it happen. If you tell somebody you're committed to their improvement, You need to demonstrate that by making it a priority in your calendar. Number two, you want to be somebody who really models great questions. You've got to be prepared to be able to teach them to discover in this coaching journey, just like they're going to discover in sales. So you actually can coach and both operational issues and deal coaching at the same time. Ask them questions such as, what's working right now for you and what isn't? What are you doing differently now than you were doing 6 months ago when you were way above plan? Where do you feel you could improve? What do you need to do to win more? How do you develop or measure good relationships? I love it when salespeople tell me, well, I sell because of relationships. Dig to the next level. What does that mean? What does that look like? And what does that relationship buy you? Is it a chance to bid, or is it a priority slot in terms of I'm going to be there ahead of other folks? As Michelle mentioned, there's great ways to kind of gather the data to get ready for that. Both Gong.io and Chorus.io are good. Zoom tools are good. I also encourage rep self-assessments or self-audits where they see themselves as strong and weak. Usually a rep will grade themselves as being lower in terms of capabilities than you will. So you can actually use that audit to both encourage them in a couple of areas as you also focus in on the weaknesses. And then have a really clear agenda. Let them know where you're going to go in that coaching model so that they're on board and they're not surprised. And then the last one that I would just tell you from, again, years of teaching to sales managers, you want to guide, don't dictate. Self-discovery is really the way in which an individual recognizes a gap and goes to improve it. If you always are giving them advice or you're saying, look, I've looked at this situation and here's what you've got to go do, that doesn't take very well. And so I always encourage people, don't think of this as a bad sales call where the salesperson, in this case, the manager, does all the talking. You really want this to be a conversation, and you want them to do the discovery, because it's while they're talking, they're going to buy into the need for change. Don't expect it to happen at all at once. It's going to take multiple sessions. So write down the plan so that you can track process. Make it so that the goals can be measured. Use SMART goals or some other mechanism. So a month from now, when you meet to follow up, there's no doubt over whether they accomplished the goal or not. And sometimes there's a fear you're going to send this plan to HR. Make them clear that that's not the case, unless, of course, it is. But for the most part, it's going to be between the two of you to improve in this particular area. All of these things are relevant that we just talked about, whether it's face-to-face or whether it's remote. A couple of key things from a remote perspective. Always use video. We need that additional portion of seeing the face, seeing the reaction to be able to get full communication, whether it's FaceTime, Google Duo, or Zoom. And I'd recommend you not record these sessions. I think you have to have a certain degree of comfort and flexibility. Let people talk their minds without the fear that this tape's going to get out someplace. Number two, expect the sessions to take a little bit longer remotely than they're going to be when you're in person. And that's because it's going to take more time to kind of rapport build, relational talk, understand how they're doing before you're ready to transition into the more difficult areas of improvement in certain places. Don't let these sessions slip into deal coaching. We all, by nature as sales managers, coach deals. Here's how you win this one. And recognize that our salespeople, if we're talking about an area that's uncomfortable to them, they're usually very good at redirecting. That's what they do all day long. They redirect from an objection a customer might have into an area where you're strong. They will do the same thing with you. And so you want to make sure that you stay focused on this is an improvement operationally. Again, just touching on this idea of, channel your inner Boy Scout or Girl Scout. You want to be prepared. And then finally, just own a part of it. When you come up with this plan, try to develop some things that you're going to do so they can see you're committed to their improvement, and then give them an early win. One of the things I always love is if they're going to try something new in sales calls, have them text you the next couple of days. Every time they do a call, they've really accomplished that. That text reinforces their behavior, and it gives you a chance to kind of cheer them on, because ultimately we want our folks to be successful. So these are some of the ideas that we have had about ways to remote coach. We're welcome to take questions. So you've got a chance to either chat them or use our Q&A button. I will also tell you that we spend a lot of time in our Sales Leadership Academy class, which is 8 virtual online sessions, talking about coaching, because again, as our founder said, it's the most important aspect of being a sales manager. So if you want to know more, those classes run about every other month. You can, again, email content@thebrooksgroup.com, and we'd be glad to answer that. So if you've got questions, please chat, ask the questions, and we'll get to them. We've got one that comes up here. How long should an individual coaching session last? A little bit of that's going to be based on the personalities that are involved, the behavior styles of the people involved. In my mind, a good session is probably, if you're one-on-one, is probably going to take the initial time at least 45 minutes, maybe an hour. After that, you can maybe do follow-up in half-hour increments. But by the time you sort of reconnect, there's always going to be some conversation around the deals or the territory or the business. It's going to take the first sort of 10 minutes, and that gives you 20 to 25 minutes or more if you're going 45 minutes to be able to talk through all those issues. So I think that's the best amount. You can do it shorter. I've seen coaching calls done in terms of like, every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. But it's really intense. And when that happens, the manager tends to slip into, here's what you should do. When we teach this in class, we teach people to ask questions, and they're really usually good about sourcing the information, but then they get tight on time and they start to dictate the solution. And that's never a good thing. How do we handle resistant people? That's a really good question. Thanks for that one. I guess I'd want to understand the reason why they are hesitant. If it's because they don't want to change, then I think you have to, one of two things. The better prepared you are, where you've got data, quantitative data in terms of their performance, or qualitative data. If it turns out that they're generating half the prospects of anybody else, which is resulting in them being at a lower percent of their number than anyone else, that's an easy thing to show people. And if you're showing them that kind of data, if they don't want to change, you've got to ask why. And it may be one of those, as I mentioned earlier, won't do, as opposed to can't do kind of issue. Can't do, you can coach; won't do, you can't. So then you got to kind of understand, why are they reluctant, and can you do something to remove that blockage? If they're just resistant because they're afraid that people who come in to coach are going to get put on a performance improvement plan and let go, you can just set it up front in your staff meeting, talk about, hey, we want to implement a coaching program. It's going to be customized for everybody. Everybody's going to participate, from our number one performer to our newest person. And we're going to really work on how you improve, because as the sales leader, I'm only going to be able to move this organization to the numbers we need to achieve if all of you are working at your best. So those are kind of my ideas on resistant people. I guess the other question would be, if somebody's resistant to improvement, you've got to ask yourself the question, why? And if they are, then, what happens to them in the long term? What about using 100 to 150 power questions turn into probing, same question, but different presentation? 100 to 150 is probably too many. But I think that to be able to have a good set of questions based on the area that you've recognized this person needs improvement is, and again, if you use the word probing as the way it's taught in Impact, it's a great way to do it, because we're using open-ended questions. We're allowing them to communicate. And then I'll give you one other item. I learned this not in sales coaching, but in having teenagers. In having teenagers and adult children, I learned to ask the question, would you like my opinion? And especially with adult children, that allows them to either invite you into the process or not. If it's a little more difficult if they're your employee, but if they're giving you sort of their ideas and you want to be able to share yours, then I think to ask that and be invited into the process is good. If they deny and not let you into that process, then again, you've got a different problem around just resistance. Any additional questions? We've gone a little bit over, apologize for that, but hey, who complains when a happy half hour or a happy hour goes long, right?
That's right. That's right. While we're waiting for some extra questions, just a reminder, our next webinar will be December 4th. That will be our last one for 2020. We will be back in 2021, and our topic will be things we've learned in 2020. And we will keep it to 30 minutes, even though I think we can agree there have been a lot of takeaways from 2020, but we will keep it to 30 and we'll give you the highlights.
Both Michelle and I will be deep into tryptophan naps by the time 2 o'clock on Friday rolls around, the day after Thanksgiving. So here's some best practices. Your team's only as good as you coach it. You own coaching if you're the sales leader. That's why you get the title manager or leader after your name. Start with really clear standards. Help them understand what it is. You'd be surprised, as Michelle said earlier, how many times there's a disconnect between when we talk to managers and when we talk to their people about clarity around certain items. Use your weekly meetings or your every other week, however you do your staff meetings, to do broad skill coaching. When you get one-on-one, guide, don't dictate. Model and ask really good questions. And I forgot to mention this, but the coachee, the person that you're coaching, really should be the one who helps create the plan, who documents it, who brings it back in writing. You'll have a copy as well, but give them some involvement. The more it's a two-way project, the better. As we know in selling, when only the salesperson takes the action items, the customer is not as committed. All right. Thank you all very much. Have a great, if you're in the US, have a great Thanksgiving. I know our Canadian friends and European friends don't get that off. Canada had theirs earlier in the year. Have a great end of the month, and we'll see you all in December.